Yeah. So let's frame this for the folks listening, because we're recording now. And yeah, we brought you back because we got a lot of good feedback from our first episode with you, right? We titled it "To Bend or Not to Bend," right? And we just talked about all those intricacies and whatnot. So when we talked on the phone, I told you I think collection would be a good topic, and as you kind of alluded to, there's some good synergy there because Emily Kitching with the Eclectic Horsemen just got together with you, and you guys did a pile of work.
It's called the Eclectic
with all your
Classroom.
Zoom sessions where you talked about that
or
in
just
detail.
Call Emily.
And I think Ben and I would both recommend
because,
if
their website
someone's listening to this
really
and at the end they're like, wow, I want to hear way more
stuff.
So
there is
go to
a search
Eclectic
function
Horsemen,
there, I think.
look up collection, Dr. Deb Bennett, that whole deal. And okay, good deal. Sure. Yeah. Right. But anyway, so I called you and I was like, we want to talk about collection. You said that was perfect. So I kind of want to, well, I thought since we had you on, the best thing to start this off was I asked Google, who I know you're really fond of, what does collection mean in horse riding? So do you want to know what Google AI has to say about the definition of collection? And maybe that'll be a good launching off point for our discussion. Okay, so AI, like Google's AI says, in horse riding, collection is when the horse shifts its weight from its front legs to its hind legs. That is the first sentence.
I've known Joe since he was a teenager.
So, here's how I have, when I've had to try to oversimplify the concept of collection. I heard it once. Are you familiar with who Joe Walter is? Yeah.
No,
so I heard Joe.
Yes.
Yeah. So I heard Joe say once, he was like, we're trying to get their nose and their tail closer together. Right. And obviously there's a lot more that goes into that, but in my opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, like he's not wrong. Like
the
that
nose
does
and the tail become
happen.
Closer together.
Yeah. They were trying to get their nose and their tail closer together.
And also
but
conceptually.
There's a lot of things that go on in between the nose and the tail to make quote unquote true collection happen, right? Gotcha. Right.
That is
so
the last
I know,
piece of the puzzle.
I know when I've seen previews of the discussions you've had
in a way,
with Emily, maybe this is the best place to start for our discussion. You've talked a great deal about the emphasis on the horse lifting the base of the neck.
In Europe, Europeans labored for centuries.
Okay.
And I don't mistake that. Hundreds of years to figure out.
So when you say historically,
what this is all about, and never got it right.
Where do we start?
They got to start.
Like, what's first collection?
Europeans lagged behind culturally and also technically during the same period. That's why we have, in school you learn about the Dark Ages, when books were burned, except the Bible, and the light of knowledge was not altogether, but nearly extinguished in Christendom. Where it lived was in the Muslim world. The Muslims invented algebra. That's why it's called algebra. Al-jibra is an Arabic word. So and also Muslims discovered the zero. Ancient Romans knew how to tote things up and count things like men in their army or bags of oats or bags of, wouldn't have been oats, it would have been barley. But they had no concept of zero. And that also means they didn't understand the number line, meaning negative numbers were not in their mind. So the world of Islam preserved libraries. And the only library in medieval Europe and early Renaissance Europe was in Naples, Italy. And why? Because since the 11th century, Naples was conquered by the King of Aragon in Spain. Spanish King of Aragon, which at that time was an independent kingdom, conquered Naples. And this guy was wise. And he found that he had conquered a city or a city-state that had a viable, live Jewish population of scholars and also Muslims, as well as Christians. And he said, we will tolerate everybody. We will use the best of each culture to make this a great city. And every king of Aragon from the 11th century onward, after he got sick and tired of the politics at home and felt like he was getting to be an old man, retired to Naples, which was heaven. When the great Christian heretical debates started to happen before the Inquisition, and the scholarly monks who could read utilized the library in Naples. And the only other great antique library was the one in Egypt, which burned. Unfortunately, it burned down later. And of course, it's all full of dusty old papyruses. But boy, would we like to have access to those now. So Naples is also the heart of the Renaissance in terms of horsemanship. It was in Renaissance Naples that the new ideas about collection started to get practiced. Partly this was due to good old Marco Polo, who most Europeans did not take seriously. They thought he was nuts because he had gone to the Orient and traveled in northern India, what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and ultimately China, and worked for the great Khan as an ambassador, and found favor in the Khan's court and in the Mongol rulers, the Han rulers of China. These people were literate, skillful, technologically advanced. And so Marco Polo came back and dictated a book he was put in prison when he came back, never mind why. A lot of politics there. But his cellmate also thought he was nuts. And so a lot of the chapters in Marco Polo's travel books start out because they're really being written by this other guy. And he says, well, my cellmate told me this, and I don't really believe it, but this is what I think he said. Things like that houses had glass windows, central heating, central plumbing, linoleum floors, which were not linoleum, they were leather, but they essentially functioned exactly like linoleum tile. Europeans simply did not believe that this was even possible because they didn't have those things. They had been lost. The Romans had some of them. Romans had central plumbing if you were wealthy enough, and also central heating. They knew how to build hypocausts. So they'd have a forced heat underneath the floor. But by the time the Renaissance rolls around, most people, and so they would read Marco Polo's Adventures of Marco Polo as light after dinner comedy. Now, who took Marco Polo seriously was a few horsemen who gleaned out of his travel, the descriptions of things he'd seen in the East, an idea of collection, of what a collected horse means. The other guy who took Marco Polo seriously was Christopher Columbus. From Marco Polo, he got the idea that by sailing west, you could arrive in the East. Unfortunately, he didn't realize North America would be in the way, which is why Native Americans are called Indians, because when he landed here, he was still confused about where he was, and he thought he'd found India. So they're called Indians, right? But this is where Europeans were at the time. So who knew about collection from 2,000 years before were the Persians, and from them, the Chinese. They knew all about it. And there is artwork of many, many items of artwork that date from the 6th century BC and from the time of Alexander the Great that show horses in high collection. In other words, they're not trotting, they're passaging. And this is also where polo was invented. The game of polo is an imitation of mounted warfare. And it was invented in southeastern Turkey, where it abuts Iran. And so it's, at the time, the national boundaries were not there. So these are essentially Median Persians, early Persian rulers, who are the generals and those who were of high cultural status and more knowledgeable. So and it also shows up in their bidding and in the artwork that shows not only the actual artifacts that have been dug up from archaeological sites, but artwork that shows the bosal. Now, when we say bosal, we are talking about collection, but we're not thinking about a Mexican bosal. That is a later development. The original bosal the Mexican bosal is simply upside down. And it's a whole different animal. It still requires and engenders collection, but it's not the simple, straightforward tool that was originally used by the Persians. And that was later, after the rise of Islam, which happens in the 7th century AD. So the first thing the Muslims did after they got on fire from being preached to by Muhammad was they went east, because they didn't have any horses. These people are Arabs. They have camels. They don't have horses to speak of. And they don't have Arabian horses. There are no Arabian horses yet. Arabians are not the oldest breed by any stretch. They are a derivative of a bunch of other stuff that happened at a certain historical period. But anyway, these early followers of Islam were very united and convincing, both by military arms and also by persuasion. So they went east to convert. And as soon as you convert to Islam, you're a brother. That means you owe the other guy anything you would have gave your brother. So they asked for horses and they asked for instruction. And they got it. They got good horses and they got good instruction. So the Muslim armies also very soon understood more about collection. And they use it in a more practical manner because they're warriors. The Persians had such a high culture that they had leisure for arena work and would train horses much as the Renaissance Europeans would in a manege, a walled enclosure which was meant to foster the concentration of both the rider and the horse. So the Persians invented the bosal, which is a noseband device, which was originally a modification of a camel hobble. It's so you take. People use what they've got, and so they said, "Aha! It's about the same size as a horse's nose." So they have this braided leather and rawhide thing that they circle around the horse's nose, and they clasp it at the top with a ball and loop. And it is to the ball and loop on the top of their nose that the reins are attached. This is still the basic, same exact design that you find throughout the Caribbean and Colombia. So you go, if you ask a Pasofino man to show you his bozal, he's going to show you something made out of leather, probably, or it could be sisal or braid that has a ring, a loop, a knot, something, a ball on the top of the nose to which the reins are attached. Now, this makes a huge difference because when you pull on the rein and the place where the rein is attached is on top, that means you're going to be pulling the head. It's a direct pull kind of an arrangement. If you pull with your right hand, the horse is going to turn his head to the right or follow the feel, and vice versa. But if you do that with a Mexican bozal with the fiador underneath, it will turn their head the opposite way, and that ain't how you ride a bozal. It's a whole nother animal to know how to use Mexican equipment as opposed to the original hakima. Now, you need to understand what the word hakima means. It comes from the Persian word hakma, which means noseband. So the Muslim pronounce it a little different, and then it got across to North Africa with the Berbers and the related peoples, and they changed it a little bit. And when it got into Spain, then it became, the people who have a little different language. When they invaded Spain in 711 AD, and then flooded the entire peninsula, almost overtaking France in one great rush that came across in 711, because a scouting party that crossed the Straits of Gibraltar in 710 found the country virtually undefended. The Visigoths, who had been occupying the Iberian Peninsula for the couple of centuries before, were not well equipped and not well organized, and the caliphs whose armies came across just had no problem, and they ran over the whole country. Well, they sat in Iberia for just shy of 700 years. That's a long time. The American conquest was only 500 years ago. The conquest of Mexico was about 500 years ago. That's not as long. So for 700 years, they had the opportunity to fight with each other because the Christians pulled up they gathered the remnant of the people and set up in the north behind walls way up in the hills. So they were hard to completely eradicate. And they gradually pushed back through the centuries. If you read the history of Spain and Portugal, you can read all about this. And it seesawed back and forth. But there is nothing on earth as likely to cause cultural cross-fertilization as warfare. And so pretty soon, what's the Alhambra? It's really Creole. And so you want to know about Creole, you guys ride quote-unquote Western, right? Does your saddle have any decoration, any carving on it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does it consist of? What is it? What do you see when you look at that carving? Is it floral?
Yeah, mine's floral.
Or it might be a geometric pattern or kind of a combination as like kind of basket weave or something like that.
Yeah, mine's floral, some flowers in the saying.
Yeah, have you ever seen a Western saddle that had a picture of a man's face on it?
Yes, I have.
Was it a prize saddle or a custom made?
Yep. It was a custom made saddle. It had Dr. Seuss on it.
Okay, cute.
Sure,
but this is like latter day.
Okay,
and it's American
as well.
But the traditional Western saddle has no representations of any human being.
Oh, and I did know a cowboy in Montana with an old Wade saddle and had a nude woman across the back behind the cantle.
Yeah, right. You can get that, and that would not be a traditional, but could be, well, it could be American. But what I'm telling you is the reason why the normal traditional decoration on Western saddles is either geometric or floral is because in Islam, it is forbidden to draw the face of God. To represent, and since man is of God,
different culture.
You don't get any portraiture, or very, very rare. And certainly objects that are decorated are not decorated with animal forms or human forms. But, and that's why, you picture in your mind the gates of the Alhambra, or the towers of the Alhambra, the gateways, they're just gorgeous, but they're floral. They look exactly like the patterns that are traditional on Western saddles. So don't be thinking that the Western saddle is some kind of an American invention, because it certainly is not. It goes way, way, way back, just like the Bosal does. So what are you doing when you put a Bosal on a horse's head? You are going to do what I call twirling the head, which is sometimes used as a chiropractic maneuver today. In humans, it is an acknowledged part, or an important part, of what is called the Alexander technique, whereby the practitioner very gently rocks the patient's head. And this goes a long way to relieving tension in the back, and it's a magic technique. It really works. And the chiropractor will probably not be quite that gentle, but he's basically doing the same stuff. When I do it, or my students do it, or Ray Hunt did it, there is a certain feel on the reins. This is how you teach a horse to bridle, because this is how you get rid of the brace in their neck, is by twirling the head. Now, the ancient Persians knew all about this. Evidently they did, because they invented the tool that makes it easy. So they put this device on their head with the thing on their nose. You're not going to yank their head around. You're not doubling them. Doubling is not a very good technique. You are gently inducing them to let go. You get on your young horse and you pick up the rein and you wait until he lets go of that brace that's going to be in his neck. And in America, see, we have to perhaps modify the technique somewhat to meet current conditions. So I don't think I've ever gotten on a horse that somebody gave me to ride that they had been messed with by somebody else other than Ray Hunt, who used to let me ride April. And that was a lesson to me then. But if it's a student's horse or a client's horse, almost 100% of the time, the first thing that happens, as soon as you touch that rein, the horse goes, gunk. Yep, right, I'm waiting for you. He tightens all the muscles that are right behind the pull, so that he's all ready to tell you that maybe he ain't going to turn the way you were hoping he would turn. And for whatever reason, some horses have it in mind that they're not going to go along with your ideas. Others are simply physically uncomfortable, and it doesn't really matter which. Now, to advance the story many centuries, I already said that Europeans were awfully slow to catch up on this, and it took them forever. Very few early guys, and the one that stands out in my mind is Fiaschi, sort of had it on the ball, and they were less into punishing and whipping and constraining and forcing, and more into thinking about how to get the horse to comply of his own juices. So that, in any time period, you get better practitioners and worse. But not until you come to the beginning of the 20th or the 19th century. So in the 1830s comes along Boucher, Francois Boucher, who was the greatest genius of European horsemanship of that era, of that century. And Boucher is the guy who invents head twirling. He called it jaw flexions. And he called it jaw flexions because he was initially actually addressing the jaw, not the pole, not the neck. He was addressing the jaw. But as he messed with this more and more, it became evident to him, and he says as much in his writings, that there was more to it. And he then added to and modified the techniques he had originally published. So, and that caused all kinds of problems because students who had been with him in the beginning started fighting with students who had been with him in the later days. and on his deathbed, he said to Favarot de Kerbrecht, who was his best student, that he felt very bad about that and that it was so unnecessary and so unproductive. But because it's all one, they have got to let go of the brace that is going to be there from the mid part of the neck to the end of the tongue. And every structure in that length that can brace, a horse will brace unless you help him not to. And we use a number of different ways to help the horse not brace up. But this is the beginning of collection. It starts in ancient Persia 2,600 years ago and is not figured out by Europeans until about 1830. Now, between the Renaissance and Fieschi's time, which would be 1550, and right at the end of the 18th century, there you have people getting up to Boucher, but not just, the generation before him. You would have had Robichon de la Guérinière. And if you look in his book, all these guys' books have been reprinted, and they're very easy to buy, and they're not too expensive to buy. And any person can own them for their horsemanship library and should. I mean, I would love it if all the dressage people actually read what it says and own the books that are supposedly the basis for their sport. Because for one thing, dressage originally in the 18th century was not a sport. It was something practiced for the benefit of the horse and of the king and the armies of the king to make better war horses. But also it had the benefit of making them more beautiful. Now, when I say dressage, I don't mean anything like they're doing now. The dressing horses in the 18th century was a whole nother animal, and that's perhaps another conversation. But what I want to point out is Guérinière, every single one of these guys. So you've got the Renaissance people in the 16th century, and then you get people like Pluvinel, who was the écuyer to Louis XIII in the 17th century, and you get late 17th century people like William Cavendish, who was the écuyer to Charles I and Charles II during the English Civil War. And then you move up into Guérinière, and the Guérinière was kind of cutting edge. So there are some other people that are sort of more straight down the middle. Every single one of them, you can buy their books. Look in there, and what you're going to find out is that when they ran out of ideas, they went to force. And if you look in, one of my favorites is the Wilton House guy, who is the Baron Reis de Eisenberg, who had been a bereiter at Vienna and was hired by the guy who was at that time the King of England, which is George I, that's the guy that George Washington was fighting against. Remember him?
Mm-hmm.
George? Yeah, that guy. So, right. So when you look in his book, you look at the Wilton House images, which you can buy, you can look at them online. He gives you the complete set of little primitive paintings that he painted himself. And he gave to the young Earl of Pembroke, who had become his protege, as a parting gift. So you got this whole set of pictures, and what they are is a complete visual instruction book on how horses are trained. And it shows you, starting them out in a watering bit, which is what we today call a snaffle, and proceeding to whatever else. There is every way you ever heard of to tie them up or tie them back, to put running reins on them, to run it through the bit, to run it through the cabesson, to run it through who knows what. Go look. And of course, I've published this in Eclectic Horsemen. This was a number of years back. But just to show you, these guys, when they run out of ideas, they go to try to fix it in the mouth. And that will not fix it. Now, you guys have heard it said that there's a key to every mouth. And we all, if we ride with Ray, we know, and with Tom, we know that is not true. The bit is not going to fix your problems. But I will tell you that there is a key to every mouth, and that brings me back to your initial question. The base of the neck. The key to every mouth is the base of the neck. And when you understand that, you will know how to use a snaffle bit, or a curb, or a spade, or a basalt. The key to every mouth is the base of the neck. So now it's time for us to define what collection actually is in its essence. And the collection is a spinal posture, a particular spinal posture. It is that particular spinal posture which is best suited for the horse's health and soundness, to maintain the health and soundness of the horse when he has to bear weight. It is also absolutely natural to horses in that anytime you turn a stud horse out and he hasn't been out for a couple of days, he's happy. He's a happy boy. And he will parade around in the paddock, arching his neck and arching his back in what anybody alive would say is a state of collection. Okay? It's very pretty when they do that. And they volunteered on their own because it comes natural to them, because this is how their bodily anatomy is meant to work. So that's a definition. Now let me proceed to break that down into a description. Because you started out by saying, Joe Walter said, we're going to move the tail and the head closer together. How does that occur? I have been teaching this since 1977. So repeat after me. You may as well memorize it because I have. Collection, part one. It's a 3-part description. Collection starts from and is always primarily the product of coiling of the loins. Okay? Coiling of the loins means flexion. Now I'm talking veterinary language. Flexion
Okay.
of the spine at that point where reiners say the horse breaks down. They don't mean he becomes crippled. They mean that he breaks his butt down. He flexes the spine where it attaches, where his back attaches to his butt. Okay, that's called the loin span. And flexion in that zone of the body primarily focuses on the lumbosacral joint, which is the last joint between the back and the sacrum, which is part of their rump. Okay, it's a sacrum and pelvis form their rump. But there are 6 bones in the loin span. There are 6 lumbar vertebrae, and they all participate. They are set up to make that particular action. Okay, so collection starts from and is always primarily the product of flexion of the loins, flexion of the lumbosacral joint. This is what engagement of the hindquarters means. Okay, so there's a certain school of horsemanship, which I will not name because I don't like them, which talks about engaging and disengaging the hindquarters. And it's like they haven't read a book, because what they're doing is screwing around with the definitions of things or with the meanings of words, which just confuses people. Okay? What they are advocating is an extreme form of untracking, and they call that disengaging the hindquarters. But that's not related to this at all, really. I mean, it is related because horses do it, but engagement of the hindquarters means coiling of the loins. Disengagement of the hindquarters means extension of the loin joint. Okay, in other words, uncoiling of it. So the horse has the capability to extend his back and also to round it up or coil it up. And that is built into and specifically built into the lumbar vertebrae. Okay, so that's part 1 of the description. Part 2, collection is almost instantly followed. As soon as he coils his loins, almost instantly he also will round the free span of the back. Now, the free span is called the free span because it's that part of the back which doesn't have a leg right under it. That's why it's like the free span of a bridge. Mm-hmm. So the horse coils his loins, and that causes him instantly and automatically to raise his back. Now, if you guys ever rode with Ray, one of the things that would regularly go on was he would maybe start a class by challenging the group to tell him which body part his horse moved first when he would set off from a halt into a walk. And some people that were pretty good observers would say, oh, he moved his ears, or he curled up his lip, or I don't know what, it picked up a foot. But the right answer was he raised his back. They can't pick up their feet unless they raise their back. They have to do that. They have to round up a little to move at all. Because if you're going to build a vertebrate, if you're going to build a mammal, you start with this chain, which is the spine. And the legs are hanging off of that chain. What the legs do is entirely dependent on what the back does. So they coil their loins and they raise the free span. Part 3, collection is completed when the horse raises the base of its neck. Now that can mean raise it by itself. Have you ever gone out to the barn kind of early in the morning and the horse is, or maybe in the afternoon, and he's been napping and he sees you coming and he's happy to see you and he goes, he does this great big stretch. You ever notice how high their neck gets? That is the action of raising the base of the neck, independent of anything going on anywhere else. They can raise the base of their neck without having to do anything with their hindquarters. But normally in collected riding, the two things are coupled together so that really your aim is the hindquarters, and that's where all the good stuff is. Tom Dorrance used to say that if you had trouble with your horse, in all probability it was originated in the hindquarters, and that you would probably need to look at the hindquarters for your solution primarily. But and the other thing is Sliper's model, which everybody now, all researchers acknowledge to be the correct biomechanical model and the best one. And I've used that same model too for all my work. Sliper was a German researcher who was working in the 1940s and who was the first to liken the horse's back to the construction of a cantilever bridge with the cables and the bridge floor and the pylons. And it is a very good model for exactly. So when I've published this, I have modified that to show that it's also a suspension bridge that has some cantilevering capabilities. Because think about a levad, a horse performing a levad. That's when you see the whole front end rise relative to the butt or relative to the core of the loins. So now you know what collection is. Now, what body part have I not mentioned?
The head.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with their head. Nothing. The head, whatever the head is doing, is the product of relaxation plus gravity. So if you use head twirling as a technique, which can be done in your hackamore, as long as it's not the Mexican one, but you can use a lunging cavesson, you can use a snaffle bit, you can use your hands if you're working with him from the ground. If you use those and you are successful in twirling the head, the result will be that he'll let go of the brace that's in his upper neck, pharynx, larynx, hyoid apparatus, and tongue. All of the things that are between there and there. He will just let it go and it'll all be relaxed. When he does that, his head's just going to hang down because of gravity. So relaxation plus gravity. That's what you want. That is what the soft feel is. That is what a soft feel is. So Ray used to say, tuck their jowl under their throat. It's a perfect description of twirling the head. Get them to tuck their jowl under their throat. This has nothing to do with the horse doing a gesture with his head that makes it look like he's saying no, nor does it have anything to do with a gesture that makes it look like he's saying yes. It is a different possible motion that can occur at the pole, which means that if his head were plumb, it would rotate around a vertical axis in such a manner as to bring the jowl under the line of the jugular, under the throat. So, nor does it have to be a big action. We're not doing this to show how big of an action we can get the horse to make. The point is to do enough, whatever is enough for that particular animal, to provoke that release of all the bracing that's in his neck and his tongue and his hyoids and pharynx, for example. Now, I know I have dissertated here and anticipated some of your questions, so I'm going to now take a breather and let you talk.
All righty. Well, one of my questions right off the bat, you talked about the history of the bozal quite a bit.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about proper movement of the head and where collection really starts. This is more of a technical question, but I've heard that it's not good to start a young horse in a bozal. And you'll have different trainers that do it. And I think for various reasons. I think some people think there's a certain, mystique around riding without something in the horse's mouth. There's all types of reasons.
Mexican bozal?
Yes, a Mexican bozal.
Yeah, I would agree.
In the horsemanship world, it seems like there's people who, for various reasons, pride themselves in starting a horse in a bozal.
Yeah.
And they'll even look down on people that start in a snaffle bit.
Yes. Well, if you talk to the typical charros,
yep,
they don't think much of Americans. and their snaffle bits. But the typical charro knows that before you ever try to put that bosal on that colt, he already understands how to go to the outside rein. And if he does not, don't see, you got your mind on the wrong end. In order to ride in Mexican equipment, the horse must untrack fluidly and must know to displace his weight to the outside in response to the understepping of the inside hind leg, which will cause his body to form an arc, assuming there is no brace in him. So you got a relaxed horse, it's a happy horse. You're going to ask him to untrack with his right hind leg. That will instantly make him bend and adopt a whole body arc to the right, which you then receive in your right rein. That is how you turn in a bosal. You do not turn by doing anything at all with the inside rein. The turning and this is true of all higher level riding. This is called riding on the diagonal eights. And I would love to raise every student to the place where this is where their thinking is, and it's also where their skill set is. To turn has nothing to do with the reins or the bit. Now it does if you're in pony club and you're 9 years old and you're following around on this iron-jawed old school horse and you're in a line of students. The only person in that class who's actually riding their own horse is the person at the head of the line. And, you got to learn how to ride somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a time and a place to ride crudely. But there's also a time to grow up and become a mature rider. So to change, how do you ride a figure of 8? A figure 8 does not look like the numeral 8, the Arabic numeral 8. It looks like two perfectly round circles that are conjoined at a single point. That is a schooling figure 8, a proper figure 8. How do you make a perfect circle? Not with the reins. Why is there a circle? Did you really think the ancient Greeks or the pupils of the French court went out there with their manuscripts and said, seahorses, you got to do this? It flows from the horse. So you get on him and you ask him to untrack, and assuming there is no brace in him, that he's not stiff. If he is moving forward at all at a walk or at any other gait in which he can maintain that release and that relaxation of the spine, as soon as he untracks with either inside hind leg, whichever one it is. So let's say he's going to the right, he'll untrack with the right hind leg. That means he brings the right hind leg under the body shadow. He does not step straight forward toward his elbow with his hind hoof. He steps obliquely forward and across. And when he does that, his body will arc. Now, what you do with it is that's the part of the developing of your skill. If you have a good seat and you're not, bouncing around up there, and that makes your hand steady, maybe your hand will be ready to receive that arc. Because what's going to happen if you start with the reins equally adjusted, and you don't change anything and you don't move your hands, and the horse steps forward and untracks as he goes forward, what is going to happen to the tension in your, let's say he's going to the right, in your left rein as opposed to your right rein? If he arcs his body and you do not change anything, what will happen to the tension in the outside rein? Will it get more, stay the same, or get less?
It'll get more.
Right, of course. And likewise, the inside rein will get less. That's what it means to receive the arc and the energy of his motion in your outside hand. to use the outside hand, very perverted teachings and great, horrible misunderstandings among dressage people. Does not mean to pull or hold or retain or block with your outside hand. Your outside hand remains elastic and friendly because you are not trying to drive the hindquarters up into a fixed hand. You're not doing that, because if you do that, you are knocking the horse off balance from back to front and teaching him to move and to relate to your hands in the same manner as if you were out mowing the lawn and with an old push mower. And the grass is pretty thick. What do? To get the mower to go through the grass, you stiffen your arms and lean forward. Exactly what the horse will do. If that's your idea of collection, the horse will stiffen his arm, i.e. his neck, and he will lean forward on your hands. Some people actually think this is what positive bit contact means, but it's just a horribly out of balance animal. So you have to teach. Go read Mike Schaefer, who was very good. He's a Cagnatian. He's a follower of Arthur Cagnat, who absolutely was a great horseman. Go read it. Go read. Very well explained, very well filmed, and watch him stop horses who have been in the habit of doing this. And the horse gets all confused and frustrated and stomps his feet and swishes his tail because Mike says, no, you're not going to be allowed to lean on my hand when you move forward. You are going to step forward without increasing the pressure on the bit and without stiffening your neck. I love to tell this story because it's the same story. Years ago, I met a guy named Tony Oitendal when I was teaching in Australia. Tony was a child, I think he was the 13th son in a very big Dutch family. And all these guys were boys during World War II. And Tony was the youngest son. His father was the most prominent jumper trainer in Holland at the time of the Nazi takeover of Europe. And his father wanted all his sons to be successful, so he got them lessons. And after the end of the war, Tony was sent to some of the most prominent German instructors. But this did not help. So his brothers most all went into jumping, but Tony went into dressage. And he wanted that lightness and he wanted that beauty, but he wasn't figuring out how to find it, despite the fact that he'd had all these lessons from famous former Nazis. So now Tony, meanwhile, had married an Australian girl, and that's why he lived in Australia. So I met him down there, and strange circumstances. I was hired by a group of gals who wanted to do massage on racehorses, and they didn't have a venue. But Tony had a classroom on his farm, so they rented the classroom from Tony. And as host, he just wanted to be there long. He didn't know me from Adam's off ox. He just wanted to be there to tell him where the bathrooms were. You know, he felt like he should. So he was in the classroom when I began my lecture. And he was not planning on staying. But the longer he was in there, he got interested. And more interested. And finally, at the end, he stayed the whole day. At the end of the day, he said, come and have dinner with us. I want to show you something. So he invited me into his home, and he said, I have a videotape I want to share with you. And on the video, there was an old man, probably 85, maybe 90. and in an old shiny tailcoat and a top hat. And this is, his generation from Europe. And who was this guy? I don't remember his name. Tony told me it and I've forgotten it. And nor did the man want his name to be known. Do you know why? What was the old man doing in Australia?
Was he an ex-Nazi hiding out?
Absolutely, he was. And a lot of these guys fled to Brazil or Australia in order to avoid Nuremberg. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean the man was a terrible person. A lot of them were more or less forced into doing what they did in order to just live through the war. What would you do?
Yeah. Mass formation, so psychosis, they call it, right?
Not only that, it was also personal survival, because they would threaten them that if they didn't go along with it, they would kill them or hurt their family or something. Because the terribleness was not of him. And this old boy had been in Vienna. He was a former berider. And Tony had a Lipizan stallion, which is hard to find in Australia, but Tony had one. And he was not getting along with this horse. So he had heard of this old man and invited him over to maybe get some advice. And that was what was on the tape. Okay, well, what do you see on the tape? Tony, the first beginning of the thing is Tony's riding the horse, and it's more or less a fight. Okay, the horse is somewhat willing, but he's, clearly stiff and uncomfortable. And so finally the old gentleman says, would you permit me to mount? So they have a big, tall mounting block, because this old boy certainly can't mount from the ground anymore. And he flips his tailcoat up, when he gets on, and addresses the reins. And Tony's holding the bridles to make sure the horse stands still for him and doesn't give him a problem. And you see the settle down in the saddle, get all set, get his legs right. And then for the next probably 10 minutes, nothing happens. Unless you were a student of Ray or Tom's, there was everything happening, but it's not big. And it's this whole conversation between this old guy and this stallion, in which the old guy is telling the stallion that he is not going to be allowed to take even one step forward out of balance or braced. And after you think that the tape got stuck, it's just minute after minute after minute, this old guy's sitting there on the, and nothing, he's not going anywhere. Finally, all of a sudden, the horse turns loose, which is exactly what Ray Hunt meant by that very same term. You know, there's a German word for this. Durchlässigkeit. And it's untranslatable. Durch means through or thoroughgoing. Lässig means to unhinge, to let free. Kite means ness. So how the hell are you going to translate that? Thoroughgoing unhingedness. It's not a very good translation. But perfect translation is turn loose. In German, the picture is of that to Lessig is like you have a doll whose arms are held on by a string that runs through the body. And you reach in there and you snip that string and the arms fall off. That's Lessig. Okay? Turn loose. So after many minutes of watching this, and I'm smiling and smiling because it's exactly like watching a lesson from Ray. And all of a sudden the horse turns loose, and it's the most beautiful, high collected walk you ever saw in your life. All parts of the horse in harmony, and the man might as well not have been there. That's the ideal. Now, then the tape proceeds, and he goes all the way around, all over the arena in this beautiful collected walk. Well, then you start thinking, well, now is he ever going to trot? And it's the same conversation. And again, after many minutes, the horse figures out how he can get his leg underneath himself, how to round his loins and step underneath, so that the very first step of trot goes up, up. The whole idea is to go up, not forward. And I laugh anymore when I see dressage people being told they need to go more forward. You know what? If you have a green horse, let's say you get a training prospect and it's a little thoroughbred horse or a little quarter horse. You know what they're going to do? They're going to trot at 80 beats a minute. That's what they're going to do. You get on them and go posting around there, you're going to be doing 80 beats a minute. If you make the horse, if you say to him, I want more energy, all he's going to do is speed up. You know, when they passage, when the trot has been brought to its fulmination, has been brought to full maturity, they're going to passage or soft passage. Then the rate goes 60, even down to 40 beats a minute, half as fast. You don't want them going fast. Collection is not speed, and you hear that sometimes from some dressage instructors, but they're not teaching it, most of them, effectively. So go watch Mike Schaefer, because you're going to see the same story about the old man on the Lipizan. And here's a modern guy that's practicing this and does, in my opinion, an excellent job. And if they're English riders, they'll benefit greatly. Western riders will come into certain realizations from watching that also, without having to change in the type of tack they're using.
Mm-hmm.
Most Ray Hunt riders ride in snaffle bits anyway, or in Macari outfits. So that's all well. But to go back to the beginning of this, to ride in the Mexican equipment already implies that the horse knows how to turn and that he's turned loose. If you try to crank him around by direct pulling on the Mexican, you're just going to ruin him. And this is where I have large objections to what they now call Western dressage. I have been informed that, oh my God, it's just horrid. I've been informed that the fellow's name is Gaetan something, and he's a wonderful rider with wonderful high trained Morgan horses. I love his riding, and what he said is, well, it got away from me. And why did it get away? Because all of these people who want this so bad, and I am so sympathetic to what they want, are so mixed up. That's what got away, because they're trying to, they think and they've got these horses leaning on the bosal, which a Mexican would vomit.
Yeah.
And I nearly do too. So, but apparently Gaetan started some other new organization to try to do a better job the second time. But I still have people sending me pictures of this stuff, and frankly, I won't print them.
Yeah.
I just simply ignore it out of existence because it needs to die now.
Yeah.
But many other things do too. And this is just the latest. We have Western pleasure to complain about. Mm-hmm. We have the perversions introduced to the original reining book by Bob Loomis. Mm-hmm. They are certainly perversions. So they're misunderstandings by people who either never had the skill or didn't understand it. It simply did not understand what collection is. So we don't think that I'm only going to complain about dressage or Western dressage, because I have a lot.
Yeah. Well, listening to you talk about these things, it puts me in mind of context versus content. And content being, what we're doing and the gear we're using, and the context being why we're doing it and what the true mechanics are. And, from the time I first got into the horsemanship deal, I learned some simple skills and got some simple gear that a lot of that stuff I could still use today. But so much of what is changing for me as the years go on is the context. Even hearing from you about where collection starts from, like that changes the context. It changes what you're trying to do. And the content, there's so much content. Everybody is buying gear and taking classes and learning techniques, but their context is so upside down from what I'm understanding.
Well, an analogy can be drawn here, Ben, by thinking about an incident I witnessed with Tom at a clinic. Some people had brought in the most beautiful little mule you ever saw in your life. And I love mules. But this was just a really, really special mule. And it had become really terribly ear shy. And you noticed that the ears had been shaved. Okay, well, the people that owned that mule had somebody else handling him at this clinic. But they were sitting up on the bank at the Merced Horsemen's Arena and I was sitting on the bank, and Tom was sitting just to my left. And the people that owned that mule were also sitting there. And after a whole afternoon of instructing one of the other fellows on how to help this mule get over being ear shy, all you heard from the owners was this constant yap about why they valued that mule. And, there's I think it's in Reno, the famous thing called the Horse and Mule Days. And it's kind of a big show, probably the biggest Western show that involves mules, because, most horse shows don't. And they had, from what they said, they had purchased this mule specifically to go win at the Horse and Mule Days. And in order to win, they have to shave the hair out of the mule's ears. Now, you guys know what ear plaques are? Ear plaques are a virus that is spread by biting flies. And it can only work, it can only succeed, or it succeeds far, way, way, way better if the ear has been shaved out. Never shave your horse's ears. Just there, to my knowledge, there is not one show association that requires the ears to be shaved. But once they get them ear plaques, the plaques become secondarily infected, and they make the ears extremely tender and sore. And that's how the reluctance to have their ears handled gets started. So finally, after listening to these people yap about how they wanted to win all afternoon, Tom, who was extremely patient with people of no morals, what can we call these people, stood up out of the golf cart. He was so angry and said, "And why did you shave the hairs out of that mule's ears? And why did they?" And that's context. They wouldn't have bothered to shave his ears if they hadn't wanted to win. And Thomas said on videotape, a lot of people, if their horse don't win, they don't care that much about him. Right. That is the ultimate context. Are you training horses in order to make better horses? In other words, to me, the act of riding is an act of physiotherapy. And that the more I can make it that, the more successful I am as a rider and trainer. Now, if you have a horse that's in perfect balance and understands perfectly what his job is and is fully confident of his ability to do it, you also have, in most show contexts, a winner. But that is a side effect. That is a side effect. So this is why I teach, biomechanics. So just as you kind of hinted at in your previous statement, it is better, you'd probably be a better trainer if you understand how the horse's body is meant to work. because then you know what you're asking. And you can even manipulate what you're asking to his benefit. Is this horse like hard to turn to the right, or is like he won't take his right lead? Yeah, well, there's a reason for that goes back to the way he's distributing the weight in his limbs. But that goes back to whether his spine is stiff. If the horse doesn't untrack well on one side, what that implies is he doesn't want to, let's say, again, going to the right. It implies that he doesn't want to weight his left hock. And that will tell you that this horse isn't going to take a right lead. Why? Because the right lead at the canter is initiated from the left hock. And if they don't weight that hock, they can't easily pick up the right lead. You can run them into it, and maybe, you know what that's like iffy, and also kind of uncomfortable to ride. But I want my horse like old Painey could do. That was such a joy to do the demo for the students on him, because Painey could. I got him to where he could pick up a lead, and it wasn't random. It was the lead I told him to pick up from a halt on invisible aids with no visible movement of my legs or any other body part. But still, I was telling him, and this is done by just tightening the muscles in my right leg, which said, put your weight to the left and go forward. And then once he does that, he's going to be cantering. That's how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So context. I'm not doing that to win the horse show. But there were a couple of times when I got to win the horse show without meaning to, in a way. But if, and I sympathize with people who have to make a living this way or want to. Okay, fine. But you still have to approach it this way. Another person I recommend to go ride with is Marie Zdunik. You know who she is? She was Chuck Grant's protege. And Chuck Grant was another Cagnatian, another person. Chuck had a wider background than just that, because he was in the military previous to that. But he did actually meet and study with Arthur Cagnat when Cagnat was in Chicago, and that's where Chuck was stabling at the time. So, I think Marie gets way too little credit. She's been around. They train horses for the high school and also competitive dressage, either way, and they're happy, productive horses who enjoy their job, and she wins plenty, and always has, because I've been watching Marie since she was 20 years old, and liking it the whole time. So that's another resource that people don't hear of very often. But of course, in a heartbeat, I'll tell you to go ride with Joe Walter, of course, or Harry Whitney, or Josh Nickel up in Edmonton. These guys absolutely do know what I'm telling you. They may not explain it the same way because they're not trained anatomists, but their context for them is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
Of course, and Buck Brannaman too, of course.
Joe, your mic is muted, I think. That's all right. At least I have good eyeballs.
We see your mouth, but no sound coming out. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of context, this is something that I've thought of. You keep mentioning high collection, right? And I'd be curious to hear you define that, because one thing, so say you go from discipline to discipline, right? And maybe it has to do with horse conformation, but I know you
No,
said
it might be.
collection has nothing to do with a
Not
horse's head,
necessarily. The
but
lower
anyone
level
can kind of look at like, well,
horses,
there's
at least used to
quote
be.
unquote collected
Today
dressage horse, and
that's
there's a quote unquote collected,
problematic as
rein
well.
cow
But
horse,
where you start
and
a horse in
kind of how
dressage is lower.
where their pole is
You
relative to their
can't
wither
raise
is
the
very
pole
different.
until he
And
can
so,
support the height
yeah,
that you're asking for from the base of the neck, and that takes time. That if you want high collection, you're going. The only correct way to have that is to stack the middle and upper parts of the neck on the base. What raises the pole is not rearing the head back. This is where saddle seat riding got off in a terrible and long-lasting confusion. If you go back to Tom Bass, he knew better. and I think actually because he had had at least the opportunity to read some Boucheriste writings from Boucher. And I think that is partly, but also he was an empath from childhood. So he may have just, similar to Ray, some people get this right without having to read anything. They just feel it, and they know that it's right from what they're feeling. So, but if you go back to the 1880s, 1890s, and look at, and Tom Bass's career went from there up through the 1920, 25, and he died in 34. He is, most of the pictures I have of him, and I have made a extreme effort to find, because most of them are uncredited. And why would that be? Because he's black. But he was the greatest American horse trainer in the English style, and certainly in the saddle seat style during that time period. And brilliant and humane and empathetic, properly empathetic. So but then comes along James Phillis, it's similar to what Bob Loomis did to the reining rule book. Phillis reinterprets Boucher. And this causes, either because Phillis himself was confused, which I think is at least partly true, or because he just wasn't clear enough. But many people who read him and who read him today still are thinking that the jaw flexions and the direct flexions that the French school speaks of are primarily to get the horse to raise its head. No. They are there. Boucher is telling you how to release the brace so that he can then raise the base of his neck without having any blockages. After that, you can raise the pole. But you are not justified if you raise the pole, if you just ask the horse to lift his head higher, carry it higher, and the base falls out, you've ruined that you got to start over. Okay, the base must not fall out. I have published numerous times a certain photograph of Arthur Cognat on an American saddlebred stallion named Colonel Washington, who he said was the best high school horse he ever owned. And that horse is so high, it's unbelievable, and yet it's correct. That is the highest pole I ever found in a photograph. And that is correct. So the horse continues to raise the base of the neck while also stretching it upward as high as possible. And that's most saddlebreds pretty long-necked horses. So that's a pretty high neck he's getting there. But don't start that way. When you start, you're going to do something called showing, this old German term is called showing the horse the way to the ground. And today I've heard that called stretchy trot or long and low. And that looks exactly like you would start a reiner or start a working cow horse. Okay, so the only difference is how high you ultimately want that horse to carry himself, and also concerning his conformation. The horse is going to have some preferences and probably some propensities, something. There's a place there where he's real comfortable, and if you if you get him working there, he's probably going to cooperate pretty good. So yeah, some horses are built more downhill, and if you look at conformation pictures of people who have horses who have been winners in the Snafflebit Futurity, the rein cow horse world, not reining, but rein cow horse, the real Grand Prix of Western, you will not find any horses that are significantly downhill in their build. Because why would you want to work again? Why make a problem for yourself? Where you're going to find downhill build is cutters, and of course in race horses, that's where the downhill build came in the first place. Because if you want to have a fast racehorse, he must not fly up. And one of the ways to guarantee that he will not fly up in front and thereby slow down, which is to say lose the race, is to build him rump high so that his body balance runs downhill. This is the same thing you would do if you were designing a motorcycle. You ever see one of those guys in come springtime, and they're out there with their shirt off?
Mm-hmm.
I used to ride a motorcycle. You know what they're doing? They're freezing their ass is what they're doing. But they're happy because finally the sun is shining and the winter temperatures have risen up and it feels like spring. So they get out on their bike and they're showing off, and they're at some stop sign revving their motor, and then they pop it into gear and Well, if your motorcycle is not heavy enough in front, you're going to flip over backwards doing that. Right? You over accelerate the back, and the balance of the bike is such that it just goes straight up in the air. So it's the same with horses. So when they come out of the starting gate, they're pushing. They're pushing as hard as a horse can push. And if you watch quarter horse racing, that they're incredibly accelerating, because the race doesn't last that long.
Mm-hmm.
So the quarter horse is built more downhill for racing than the miler would be, the stayer type horse for for the longer races that used to be traditional for thoroughbreds. But for, Harry Whitney used to have a buckskin, kind of a light chestnut or buckskin-y colored horse whose name was Doc, and I always used to call that horse Harry's Andalusian quarter horse, because he was a Roper bloodline, and Ropers have draft horse in them. I bet you didn't know that. Some of the draft horse blood that's in the quarter horse got in there openly, and some of it was snuck in. And I've written about this in Equus magazine as a kind of an expose, because there were a couple of guys who were breeding Suffolk punch mares, and that's a good choice. You know what? It was an excellent choice. You take a Peter McHugh type quarter mile racer who is actually a 3/4 thoroughbred, and put that type of horse to a Suffolk punch mare, not a big one, get a little one. And this guy down in Arizona was deliberately buying the smallest Suffolk punch mares he could find. And he gave them quarter horse names. But it produced a very nice balanced crossbred. Now, why this has been hidden, because after the end of World War II, when the quarter horse registry got started as a registry, they were being harassed and poo-pooed by the U.S. military, who just said, it's just a type of thoroughbred. And they were desperate to be recognized as their own separate breed or a different thing. So they didn't need any further problems with some people saying, well, it's just a crossbred. But they're heavily crossbred. The quarter horse is the biggest mutt ever created. But if you get a horse that's of the Roper bloodlines, that's where this more level balance and somewhat of stockier build, kind of a broader horse. I'd own one of those, but I wouldn't have a whole, because of what I enjoy doing. Your typical downhill sort of Western pleasure, long leggy thing, or your typical cutting horse. That's not a horse I would probably buy, just because that's my preference. So, because I like riding, I like manege riding, I like trail riding too, but I use the trail riding as a kind of relief from manege work or arena work, because I like the figures, I like the beauty aspect, and I like the physiotherapeutic aspect.
Mm-hmm.
That's what arena figures are for, is to make the horse supple, help to make him supple, and to teach him how to balance himself. The first thing what does a riding horse need to know how to do? It needs to know how to carry a rider. And nobody teaches that, you might say overtly, but you should. So he has no blinking idea how to carry or how to deal with your weight or your presence up there, because you screw up his reflexes just by sitting on him. And you've got to figure out how to, get that fixed up, or how to, you might say, live with that and deal with it as an athlete. And he can learn that, but you got to show him, you got to help him.
Yeah. Well, and then when you screw up his reflexes, the first thing he does is brace over his whole body, right?
Well, they brace the long perivertebral muscles. Okay, those are the muscles that run from the pole all the way down. They're not all the same muscle, of course. It's a chain of muscles, but from the pole to the top of the tail, and then down through the hamstrings. That is the top line. But collection is empowered by muscles of the underline, the abs, but also what is called by like exercise people, they call that the core. In a horse's body, inside of the abdomen, under the backbone. So you got your backbone running like this, and your pelvis running here. Attached to the underside of the backbone is a muscle complex called the iliopsoas. That's the core. It's not just the abs. The abs cannot do the job by themselves. The abs run from the pubis to the sternum. So they are the actual underline that you would rub your hand on their belly. But up inside of them, above the sheath, above the udder, if you could put your hand into the abdominal cavity and feel along underneath the backbone, right next to the backbone, adjacent to the backbone, there is a set of muscles that are specifically joined up to cause the loins to coil and also to protract the femur, which means that in most cases, as soon as a horse goes to raise his back, he's also trying to bring the hind legs forward. That's why I say it's engagement of the hindquarters. So, and then the muscles that raise the base of the neck in the big stretch, if he's going to do that, are underneath the lower curve of the neck bones. They cradle the base of the neck, and they run from about the middle of the neck bones in front, underneath the curve, and then back to about the level of the diaphragm. So, and that's important too, because the diaphragm is also a muscle, and that means they can brace their diaphragm, and that's right before they buck, usually. So you got to help them not hold their breath either. Yeah, absolutely. It's on the job. Sure. Yeah. I'm not telling you that if you do enduro riding that you need to have your horse looking like Arthur Conyat's. Right. But let me share a secret with you. If you have understood the definition and description of collection that I previously gave, you will have to admit that every good racehorse runs in collection. Because, don't they? Because they have to coil up and then they plant their hind feet and extend. That is how they go forward. The horse cannot go forward unless his hind hoofs, at least one of them, is in frictional contact with the earth. And so they coil up, they plunk their feet down, and then they use their back, the long perivertebrals, to extend the back. So extension of the back is not a sin. It's just when it's extended all the time or braced that then it becomes a problem. So, but if you're, wanting to turn cows back, there's no more enjoyable place to go than watch the videotapes from the championship, especially the youth riders at the working cow at the snaffle bit futurity. Those kids are so good, and their horses are so good. But you watch them, there's not a horse there that's not highly collected. That they're all just beautiful, rounded horses. Another place to go see high collection in action is the brothers Angel and Rafael Peralta, who Rafael is now, 95, and Angel is over 100 and still alive, I think. But they retired from active rejon. They were the greatest mounted bullfighters. And I would say Angel particularly is my first choice to be the greatest rider of the 20th century. The most skillful, the most empathetic. And it's like I have videotapes of these guys. There's a program that you can watch on YouTube that is made. It's called Tauromachie, Tauromachie. That's French for bullfighting, mounted bullfighting, and it's made by French TV. So the language, the narrator is speaking French, and the Peralta brothers speak Spanish, but you won't. You'll see what's going on. Go watch. It will make you cry. It is so good. It is incredible. It is all that you are. That is all we're after. So whether you have less of it because the job you're doing doesn't require so much, or you have more, is just a question of, it's not a different conception. It's the same conception. It's just a lesser degree. So I'm not demanding that you look like Arthur Cagnat on a 100-mile ride. However, I will also say that if you ride your horse stiff and with an extended back without any relief, you will not win, and you will kill him because it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. As we're heading towards the wrap up, kind of a final thought that I've got is, and you've already helped a lot with this by providing a different context. I'm sure for a lot of our listeners, how you've talked about collection will be a new context for them. But you'll talk to people, they're the opposite of the dressage riders or maybe rein cow guys that are trying to win. It's the everyday horse owner. Yeah. And maybe they get a little, they feel a little intimidated by hardcore horsemanship or something like that. And they'll say, oh, well, I'm not interested in all that collection stuff. I just want to get along with my horse and ride him around and hack around and whatnot. But the way you're talking about it, and that's something I've kind of come to learn more and more, is that this riding that we're doing, it's not training. And it is a physiological endeavor. Like, I like to work out. I enjoy, as a human, trying to exercise my body and get better at using it. And so it makes sense when I'm riding my horse that I'm helping him get better at using his body with me on his back. And it's so much funner to ride that way because you're kind of doing something with him. You're not out there like this subservient, master opposite of that, but this master who's telling him how it's got to be, you're kind of saying, hey, let's get fit together. But sometimes when you're trying to change somebody's mind, if you were going to, it's helpful to tell them what will happen to them, the calamity of their actions if they don't change, versus all the great things that will happen if they do change. And so for somebody who is not interested in collection or in trying to improve their horsemanship, but they no doubt spend a bunch of time working on all these little techniques and stuff, what would you tell somebody as far as saying, hey, if you're not interested in collection, this is what's going to end up happening to your horse? Like, is there kind of a list of bad things that will start happening to their horse if they're not interested in getting a better shape? And it doesn't mean, from listening to you, it sounds like people don't necessarily need to be pursuing this high level of perfect collection. And I think some people already, when they hear the word collection, have an idea in their head of this overmanaged looking horse. But after listening to you and from the things I've learned over the last couple of years, that's not what you're trying to get. But I think people are a little afraid of that image. And so that causes them to avoid working on these things or even being interested in them.
Because they're still thinking about doing it with their hands. That's what I would mark that down to. If your horse is relaxed and is present, in other words, you've also worked on attentiveness so that he is not thinking about going back to the barn, and he's with you mentally, and his intention is to, and he's interested in what you're interested in. This is another area of horsemanship, without which you cannot survive. Did you guys see that news thing lately? Do they need us in Europe? Did you see that thing about the car backfired in the park in downtown London, and they had a troop of the guy with the commandant and his younger men out there on their very fancy horses, the ones that accompany the queen when she goes out, or the king now, when they go out in their carriage, and the car backfired. And every single horse bucked every single rider off, and they ran through the streets of London, and a couple of them got hurt because they crashed into a bus or something. Do these guys need any help with their horsemanship? You know what the commandant said? He said, well, the marvelous British public has always been wonderful about cooperating by not making loud noises when we're on parade. Okay, now whose responsibility is this, that your horse obeys? Is it the kid with the popcorn that's going to throw popcorn up against him? Go read Chuck Grant, who says, because he practiced competitive dressage, but also high school. And he did a lot of exhibition rides, which were just, self-choreographed, containing all kinds of circus moves that are not thought to be correct by Germans, but which is their own bailiwick, because they're perfectly okay. All of them are okay. So Chuck Grant says the dressage horse should take a lesson from the circus horse, because the circus horse is going to maybe have to perform 3 or 4 times a day, usually at least twice a day, and is going to have to produce a uniformly excellent show every single time so that they'll come back and with their money. That's how the circus guy makes his living. Is if his horse looks crappy, then they're not going to come back. Or they're worse, they'll complain to the PETA. Okay? And he says they have to work on cement. They have to work on slick footing. They have to go in parades. And they have to stand some loud noises. And whose job is this to get the horse to do this? Now, you tell me how safe it is to ride down to the mailbox. All I want to do is hop on the horse and just ride down and pick up the mail. How safe is that if he's not with you? And if you don't know what's going to happen. That if you try to do this without horsemanship, you're begging for the trips to the hospital. I went over to do a clinic one time with some people I had sort of met years before, and for whatever reason, it came up. Well, so Dr. Deb, when's the last time you fell off a horse or got bucked off? I said, I've only been bucked off once in my entire career, and that was plenty. And I fell off. I think besides getting bucked off once, I fell off once, and that was plenty also. And I said to the guy, I haven't fallen off a horse or been spooked off or starfished for years and years and years. And he lost his respect for me because I had said that. Because in his world, it just goes hand in hand. In my world, it is stupid and unnecessary and easily preventable. And even before I had met Tom and Ray, I was already doing a certain amount in that direction, and they just fostered that pretty good. So if people own horses for all kinds of different reasons. I know women, particularly 50-something ladies who are maybe lonely or they've lost their husband through death or illness or whatever, and they just want something they can go pet. And for them, I make no efforts because they're what they want. And oftentimes these women will make their horse sick because that's what they want. You better be careful what you pray for, because you are going to get it. You are going to get. So if they are secretly longing for something they can nurse, they'll probably wind up with it. Because, and I've known women who are afraid of horses, who take the steadiest old, wonderful old horse that somebody has provided them with, or usually given them, because the giver feels sorry for the gal because she's not getting any rides. So they give her this wonderful old steady broke school horse, to keep for the rest of his life in his forever home, as they say. And what happens is he becomes the worst spookhead you ever saw, because the woman herself is afraid of him. And you're teaching him the wrong things because the person has not examined themselves enough. There was a recent article in a certain magazine, I'm not going to name which because I happen to know the gal that wrote this article, but I know her well enough to know that she should never be within a mile of a horse. She used to own race horses, which was fine. But she is afraid of horses, and she studied with people who are also afraid of horses. And she's talking in this article about, even if she knows she's a fearful rider, but she's talking about how to handle that. And she talks about prayer and meditation, and make sure you go up to your horse before you start out on your ride and ask him to give you a safe ride that day. And you know what? That's about as likely to succeed as going up to Vladimir Putin and politely asking him to withdraw from Ukraine. It is not going to work. And what amused me and distressed me at the same time about this article, written by somebody I know, was that the one thing that would help her has not even dawned over her horizon. She does not know how to read a horse. And so she says nothing about learning how to read a horse. Unless you know how to read a horse, you cannot know what he's going to do before he does it. And that is the basis for all safety. Forget the helmet. And because there's a picture of her in this article, and it's like looking at an armored knight. She has a helmet. She has goggles. She has gloves. She has the body armor that 3-day event riders wear. She has knee pads. She has shin pads. You know how long it takes to tack up a horse when you're afraid of it? It takes all afternoon. Mm-hmm. And it takes a whole lot of... I knew a guy out when I was out east that had every single night... He would come in after work. All these people out there were government workers because this is Washington, D.C. And he had a croup pad, he had leg wraps, he had bell boots, he had undergirth and overgirth, and he'd get all this stuff. It'd take him at least 45 minutes to get tacked up. And then he'd go out in the arena, and within 10 minutes, you'd hear him going, whoa, 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 because the horse would be rearing with him. And then he would, as soon as the horse reared, he'd get off, which teaches the horse what? To rear. Yeah, to keep doing that, buddy. And he'd come back, and then take him another 45 minutes to take all that crap off. And you know what? He finally left the stable, and we see an ad in the Washington Post. This is back in the day when people actually read the newspaper. And from this guy saying, Olympic quality rider, because he's building himself a barn and he's trying to get some people to board with him. Olympic quality rider. They are fantasists. So why do you have a horse? Have you looked within yourself to really ask, what about this am I really in love with? Because I've been a horse nut since I was old enough to talk. The first thing out of my mouth was, Daddy, give me a pony. And of course he never did, because we lived in town. And I used to beg my mother hey, we could have the pony in the garage. And lucky for me, I had a mother who said no. Because you cannot have a pony in the garage. Not really. Right. You've got to have a little more understanding of what the animal needs and what your responsibilities are with regard to him. But I've had an awful long and fun time with junkers. Because I don't have any money. I've never had any money. But so I get horses that nobody else wants. And then I make something out of them. But I suppose I'm a kookhead too, because, I read Black Beauty when I was a girl. And that this is what hooks us. In the last chapter, the little granddaughter, they're at the horse fair, and Black Beauty's an old horse, and he's in the consignment lot with other kind of broken down horses, older horses. And her grandpa sees him, and the granddaughter pulls on her grandpa's coat and says, "Oh, Grandpa, can we buy him? Can we buy him so you can make him young again?" Yeah, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. Okay, and if it comes out that I can go to a horse show or go on an endurance ride or do some jumping or do some whatever else of any type, I might do that, but it's a side effect. What I'm really there for is to do the physiotherapy by means of my riding and my knowledge. So you don't have to be aiming or have an over-collected, pulled together. That's awful. I want you to be able to go down and get the mail, but I want it to be safe. And I want it to be fun for you and the horse. Very enjoyable, very companionable. Buddy up, absolutely. Buddy up time. This is why I teach all my students how to teach the horse tricks. They're called tricks. They're not really tricks. They're no more tricks than teaching your grandchild to play the piano. Okay, that's not a trick. It's a skill. And it's built on the child's intellectual understanding of piano playing as well as her enjoyment of playing the piano and the skill with the fingers. Right. That's exactly what teaching the horse to work with a circus drum, teaching the horse the plie bow, teaching the horse the Spanish walk, teaching the horse to fetch, or Ollie used to be able to roll a barrel with his nose or roll a ball with his nose. These are fun, and then we go from that to a little bit more like schooling, which would be the use of ground poles and cavaletti. Why not add this? Otherwise, it's just the same old thing. When are you going to get sick of going around on the rail?
Yeah.
So, and today, more and more people have no real access to safe trail riding. So you're pretty well stuck on whatever property you're on. And if you can't make yourself some toys, a bridge and the circus drum, I don't know what you're going to do. A teeter-totter, that's another toy that's awful fun. Balls, cones, poles, ground poles. Why not mix that up and mix that in? So, happy and healthy.
I think this is a good place to wrap it up. We began with the ancient Muslims, and you brought us all the way to the backyard pony.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. It's
You're
always
welcome,
good to learn
guys.
a lot. And the history lesson was really cool. That was a lot of neat information.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you enjoyed that. And I'll talk to you next time when you think of another topic.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night, guys. See you later.